The air's thin here. It's cold. Colder than you'd think, with the sun above. Calvin's got a way of tricking you like that. You think you're in for a straightforward hike, but it's never that simple. The trail's rough, the cold bites through layers, and up here, it feels like the wind itself has eyes. I'm Mark, a hiker, or I used to be. Took a break today, figured it'd be a change of pace. The climb's been rougher than I thought, and my dog Jasper seems to feel it too. He's got that tense look in his eyes, ears constantly pricked up. He's usually steady, tougher than me, but something about this place has him uneasy. I spotted a shelter up ahead, an old cabin. Cabins in Alaska, they're supposed to be strong, reliable, built to last against just about anything this place can throw at them. Thick logs, reinforced frames, the kind of solid construction that could hold up through brutal winters. The weight of heavy snow, even the occasional bear. These shelters are always kept up, maintained like lives depend on them, because they do. You see one out here, and you know it's a safe spot. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something off. Rust lined the doorframe, a reddish-brown crust creeping up where it shouldn't be. For a cabin out here, that was unusual. Alaskans take care of these places. Any sign of neglect is rare and doesn't sit right. And then, on the walls, shallow, jagged scratches. It looked wrong, like someone had dragged something sharp along the wood. The marks were old, faded, but they had a crude, unsettling shape. Still, the wind was picking up, and I needed a break. So did Jasper. I pushed the door open, just enough to step inside. Place was darker than it should have been, the light barely cutting through. Jasper was beside me, but his body was tense, eyes locked on the door like he was waiting for something. The walls creaked with every gust of wind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like a weight pressing down on me, an unseen presence in the quiet. I lay down on the rough wooden floor, exhausted from the hike, and Jasper curled up close by, finally letting his guard down. The cabin was colder than expected, but the quiet creaks and groans faded into the background as sleep took over. Knock, knock, knock. I woke with a jolt. The sound was sharp, deliberate. I blinked in the darkness, disoriented. Jasper was up too, his ears pricked, eyes fixed on the door. I stayed still, heart pounding, trying to shake off the sleep. I waited, listening for any sound, any hint of movement outside. Nothing. I pulled myself up, groggy, and glanced out the window. The moonlight cast long shadows across the snow, but there was no one out there. Just the same quiet, eerie stillness. I opened the door and peered outside, shivering as the cold air washed over me. Not a soul, no tracks, just emptiness. I shut the door, brushed it off, and lay back down, convincing myself it was just the old wood settling. Jasper seemed unsettled, though. He kept looking toward the door, his ears twitching at every small sound. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the strange feeling that something wasn't right. Just as I started drifting off again. Knock, knock, knock. The same sound, exactly the same. I sat up quickly, blood pounding in my ears. Jasper was already up, staring at the door, his tail low and stiff. I waited, listening, trying to catch any movement outside, but all I could hear was the ticking of my own pulse. Another 10 or 20 seconds passed. Then came another knock, and then another, each one just far enough apart to keep my nerves on edge. I couldn't tell if it was someone toying with us or something else entirely. Jasper whined softly, looking to me, clearly unnerved. I got up, paced a little, trying to figure out what to do. I went to the window again, peering out, but the scene outside hadn't changed. Still empty, no sign of life. Yet the knocking continued, steady and relentless, like it knew exactly how long to wait, keeping me on edge. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. Jasper let out a low, uneasy growl, and every part of me felt tense, restless, waiting for something to finally make sense. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I walked back to the door, hand hovering over the handle, heart hammering in my chest. I took a deep breath and pulled it open fast, hoping to catch whoever, or whatever it was, off guard. But there was nothing. No one. Just the same empty, snow-covered ground stretching out under the moonlight. I stepped out onto the porch, my breath clouding in the air. Every sound sharper in the dead silence. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing disturbed. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, watching. I went back inside, locking the door behind me, trying to shake off the feeling that something unseen was close by, watching from the shadows. Jasper hadn't moved. He was still staring at the door, tense, his eyes wide and alert. The hair along his spine was raised, and he kept glancing up at me, as if asking for reassurance I couldn't give. Just as I was about to sit down, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, more insistent. Like someone or something wanted me to answer. I froze, my body rigid, and glanced at Jasper. His tail was low, his eyes darting between me and the door. I could feel his unease as sharply as my own. The space between each knock stretching just long enough to keep me in suspense. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour as the knocks continued, always with the same pattern. 3 steady knocks, then silence. 10 seconds later, it would start again. I tried to tell myself it was just some twisted prank, but there was something in the timing, the persistence of it, that made my skin crawl. Jasper let out a soft whimper, his gaze fixed on the door, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I went back, grabbed my flashlight, and cracked the door open, shining the beam into the night. The light cut through the shadows, casting long, eerie shapes across the snow, but still, nothing. As I shut the door again, a chill settled over me, a realization creeping into my mind that I didn't want to believe. Whatever was knocking, it didn't want to be seen. I sat back down, pulling Jasper close, my mind racing, the knocks echoing in my ears. Even when they stopped, each one felt like a countdown to something, some end I couldn't understand but knew was coming. The air felt thick, suffocating, every creak and shift of the cabin amplifying the silence. And in the darkness, with Jasper huddled beside me, I realized I was no longer sure if we were alone in the cabin, or if we had been, even from the beginning. The knocks kept coming, steady as a heartbeat, each one scraping against my nerves like nails on glass. I knew better than to answer again. The silence that had met me outside was worse than any reply. I shut my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but every time I felt myself drifting off, knock, 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 it pulled me back, a reminder that I wasn't in control here. Not anymore. I could feel my stomach twisting with hunger, the stress gnawing at me from the inside. My bag was slumped by the wall, and without another thought, I opened it up, rummaging through it with shaking hands, desperate for any distraction. I pulled out a tin of beans, some jerky, a half-eaten sandwich from earlier in the day. Nothing that could settle the feeling gnawing at me, but enough to keep my hands busy. Jasper lay at my side, his ears perked, but his eyes tired and wary. I handed him a small piece of jerky, but he just sniffed at it, glancing toward the door. His gaze flickered back to me, then to the door again. Like he couldn't decide which one of us was more likely to keep him safe. I chewed slowly, the taste dry and metallic in my mouth, like I was eating sand. Each bite felt heavy, wrong, but I kept going, forcing myself to focus on the food instead of that relentless knocking. Knock, knock, knock. I closed my eyes, clenching my jaw, chewing faster to drown out the sound. My hands were shaking, crumbs falling from my fingers. Jasper lay beside me, his eyes never leaving the door, his whole body tense. I broke off another piece of jerky, offering it to him again, but he barely sniffed it before looking away, ears flattened, his body rigid with unease. I pulled out a water bottle, took a long drink, the cold liquid grounding me, for a moment easing the madness building up in my head. I tried to focus on the practical, on the here and now, just me, Jasper, the food, this cabin, a haven, no matter how unsettling it felt. I told myself this over and over, clutching the water bottle, my knuckles white, trying to ignore the weight pressing in around me. But each knock chipped away at my reasoning, my mind fraying, unraveling. Knock, 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 like a drumbeat, a relentless reminder that something was waiting, and I was powerless to stop it. I looked at Jasper, his breathing shallow, his eyes darting nervously. The food sat like lead in my stomach, sour and heavy. I set the water bottle down, my fingers twitching, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the stress, the isolation, getting to me. But with each knock, my grip on that logic slipped, eroded, leaving me in a state of raw, gnawing dread. I pressed my hands to my temples, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's nothing," I muttered, though the words barely felt real. "It's just nothing." But the cabin felt smaller with each second, the walls pressing in, suffocating. And the knocks. They kept coming, steady, as if they'd continue forever, as if something out there had all the time in the world. And with each one, I felt a little more of myself slip, bit by bit, like a man trapped in a cage made of sound, driven closer to the edge by a noise that would never, ever stop. I sat there, back pressed against the wall, listening to the knocks that had taken on an almost rhythmic, taunting quality. It was no longer just sound. It was a presence, something pressing in on me, taking up space in my mind, carving itself into my thoughts. Jasper's low whimper beside me only sharpened the fear, and I found myself gripping the empty water bottle so hard my knuckles ached. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, and I felt the chill down to my bones. I tried to distract myself, to count my breaths, to close my eyes and block out the sound. But every time I did, knock, 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 my eyes would snap open again, heart racing, pulse throbbing in my temples. I dug into my bag again, hands clumsy, searching for anything to keep my mind occupied. Found a stale cracker, a crumpled protein bar, even an old map of the area. Just things, just objects. But as I looked at them, they all seemed to blur together. as if nothing in that bag could hold any meaning, as if nothing in the world could matter except for that sound, that infernal knocking. Knock, knock, knock. I was losing my grip. It was in the way my hands shook, the way my breathing became erratic, shallow. My thoughts were spiraling, sinking deeper into a strange kind of madness. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, that I was alone here, that this was all in my head. But I couldn't believe it. Not with that sound. Not with Jasper's wide eyes staring at the door, his body tense, poised as if he expected something to burst through at any moment. Just ignore it. I whispered, more to myself than to Jasper. My voice sounded weak, unconvincing. I pulled my knees to my chest, tried to ground myself, but even that felt pointless. The knocks kept coming, relentless, predictable yet unbearable. My thoughts grew darker with every passing second, each knock pushing me further into a place I couldn't claw my way out of. What if the knocks never stopped? What if I was trapped here, in this endless loop, forever waiting? Forever wondering what lay on the other side of that door. Jasper shifted beside me, his gaze locked on the door, ears twitching with every knock. I could feel his anxiety radiating off him, his body trembling, his breathing shallow. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was all right, but I didn't have it in me. I didn't even believe it myself. Then, as if reading my thoughts, the knocking stopped. Just stopped. The silence was worse somehow, like a void, heavy and expectant. I held my breath, waiting, counting the seconds. The quiet stretched out, a thick blanket smothering the room, pressing down on me. I wanted to feel release, but all I felt was dread, a sinking certainty that something had changed. Jasper seemed to feel it too. He glanced up at me, ears back, his eyes wide and confused. And then, from somewhere deeper in the cabin, came a sound, a slow, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, dragging itself toward us, inch by inch, each movement agonizingly slow, deliberate. Jasper started to growl, low and uncertain, his fur bristling, and I could feel my pulse race, my skin cold and clammy. I clutched at my bag, my mind racing, paralyzed by an instinctive, primal fear, the kind of fear that tells you something is very wrong, that you're not alone. And for the first time, I knew. Whatever was out there wasn't just knocking. It was already inside. The cold air bit at his face, but Mark didn't feel it anymore. He was numb, beyond feeling, beyond anything but the gnawing fear that had twisted into a horrible certainty. He stared down at the lighter in his hand, a small, battered thing, half used, the kind you'd pick up in a convenience store. It was scratched, worn down, the kind of thing that should have been thrown out long ago. He found it in a trash can some weeks back, a piece of junk to anyone else, but he'd held onto it, almost like it had meaning. Now, he flicked the lid open with shaking hands. The flint scraped, catching after a few tries, and a thin, weak flame danced up, casting shadows across the worn wood of the cabin walls. Those walls felt like they were closing in on him, each knock still echoing in his mind, even in the silence, like a hammer on his nerves. "No more," he whispered, his voice barely a rasp. "Please, no more." The flame licked higher, lighting his face in a dim, uneven glow as he brought it close to the wall. The wood caught slowly, and for a moment, the warmth spread through his fingers, almost comforting. It was a dangerous, reckless act, but the madness that had taken hold of him didn't care. All he wanted was an end. To the fear, to the knocking, to the relentless, twisted memories haunting him. "Please, no more," he muttered again, almost like a prayer. Jasper was still in his mind, as real as the day he had found him as a puppy. Jasper, who had been his only company, his only tether. But now even that had slipped away. The fire spread, and he watched it with an intensity that bordered on delirium. His mind unraveled in the crackle of the flames, his memories surfacing, fragmented and painful. He wasn't really a hiker. That was a lie he'd told himself, a twisted story that helped him hold on to something, anything of who he once was. The truth was a bitter weight, pressing down on him even as the flames rose higher, licking up the walls like they wanted to consume everything. Just like he did. He hadn't been on a trek or a great expedition. He had been wandering, lost and broken, ever since he'd lost his job months back. He remembered the way things had crumbled, one piece at a time. First, his job was gone. Then the money, the bills he couldn't pay, the eviction notice on his door. Then, his wife. She'd packed her things quietly, just the way she used to do everything, leaving him with a note that felt colder than anything he'd ever known. And then, finally, Jasper, his one companion, his only friend, slowly neglected and forgotten as Mark drowned himself in bottles and regret. Jasper had eaten whatever scraps he could find around the house, gnawing at cans, picking at bits of trash Mark left scattered in his drunken stupor. And when Jasper died, something inside him had snapped. He knew it was his fault. He'd let him down, let everything he loved slip away. Days blurred into each other after that. He packed what little he had left in his old, beat-up bag and left that empty shell of a house. Took to wandering the streets, rummaging through garbage, picking out anything that seemed useful. An old tin of food here, a scrap of cloth there. He called himself an archaeologist in his mind, digging through the past and trying to find something of value, some remnant of who he used to be. In a way, he wasn't alone. He'd found an old battered stuffed toy in a dumpster, a worn dog with one ear missing and faded patches where the fur had rubbed away. It reminded him of Jasper, of all he'd lost. So he kept it. He talked to it like it was real, like Jasper was still there beside him, listening in that quiet, comforting way only a dog could. It was his way of holding on to something. Even if it was just a piece of trash, the fire burned higher, licking the ceiling beams, filling the cabin with a warm, suffocating heat. His heart pounded as he watched it spread, as if he were letting go of something. The darkness outside seemed deeper, the world colder and emptier. But inside the cabin, he felt something close to peace for the first time in a long while. For a few moments, there was only the crackling flames and the warmth that enveloped him. But the knocks still echoed in his mind, as relentless as ever, as if something was still there, waiting, watching him burn everything down in his madness. Mark laughed, a hollow, broken sound, as he looked around at the flames. "No more," he said, almost to himself, watching the fire dance like it was devouring everything he had ever known. The fire burned with unnatural intensity, licking at the cabin's structure as though the wood itself had been soaked in fuel. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not in a cabin designed to withstand the harshest of elements. The logs, thick and solid, were built to endure the weight of snowfalls that could crush lesser homes, to resist the bite of bitter winds that howled for months on end. But here they were, burning like paper, reduced to cinders in no time at all. From miles away, the fire had been spotted. Word spread fast, too fast. The reports reached the station, and soon, fire trucks and rescue vehicles were speeding down narrow mountain paths, navigating the rough terrain with urgency. It was a long way to Calvin's, but the fire had been spotted from a distance, and they had to respond, no matter how hard it was to reach the spot. As the engines rumbled closer, the fire crew and rangers arrived with their canine units, the dogs barking in the cold mountain air. When they saw the cabin, the sight struck them like a blow. The flames had consumed everything around it. And yet, the cabin itself, despite its fireproof design, was collapsing inwards. The fire was intense, but they could still make out the shape of a man standing near the wreckage. It was Mark. His clothes were ragged, his face dirty, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The frantic look of a man who had lost his grip on reality. His hands were shaking, clutching something dusty, old, and oddly out of place in the middle of the fiery chaos. It was a stuffed dog, its fur long faded, the stitching unraveling in places. The poor thing had been through a lot. Mark was muttering to himself, his voice ragged, broken, barely audible over the crackling of the flames. "No more," he said repeatedly, over and over, like a mantra. "No more, no more." His eyes darted from one person to the next, pleading for something, anything, but there was nothing left to give. The fire had taken it all. The fire crew wasted no time, quickly getting to work with hoses, dousing the flames as best as they could. The canine handlers moved in, cautiously, their dogs sniffing around the remnants of the cabin. The air was thick with smoke, but the smell of burnt wood was overshadowed by something worse. The fire seemed to be contained, but something wasn't right. The ground beneath them, charred and blackened, had an unnatural unevenness to it. The surface of the earth shifted like it had been disturbed recently. As the flames finally died down, the cabin was nothing but a heap of ash, reduced to a pile of blackened debris. What should have been solid and indestructible had been reduced to nothing but smoke and remnants of a life that had been long forgotten. It didn't make sense. The cabins were built to withstand anything, snowstorms, bears, and even fire. Yet here they were, standing in the remains of something that didn't fit. Then one of the canine units, a large German shepherd, began barking, pawing at the ground near the center of the wreckage. The handlers moved in, unsure of what the dog had found, but their instincts kicked in. They started digging, scraping through the ashes with their hands, revealing something hidden below. It was a casket, not a proper burial, not something made with care or respect. It was hastily put together, the wood splintered and warped as if it had been rushed into place. The fire had done its job of masking the true nature of what lay beneath, but now it was clear. The casket was poorly constructed, thrown together with no intention of permanence. The rangers were stunned. The canine dogs went silent, as if understanding the weight of what had been uncovered. The casket was filled with bones, human bones, some of them brittle, others showing signs of decay. It was a disturbing sight, yet it made sense in a terrible, sickening way. Rumors had always circled about this particular cabin. Hikers who stayed there in years past spoke of odd occurrences, scratching sounds, knocks on the door in the middle of the night when no one was around. It had always been dismissed as superstition, or the wind playing tricks. But now, standing in front of the wreckage, it was clear that the rumors weren't just stories. They were warnings. And then it clicked. The old mayor, the one who had been convicted of murder decades ago, had used the cabins as a hideout. No one ever thought to disturb them, to dig under them. The cabins were built to last, and the people in town had long since forgotten about them. It was the perfect hiding place, the perfect way to bury the bodies of those who had disappeared without a trace. He must have bribed the contractors to make sure no one would ever question the integrity of the cabins. To keep the bodies hidden for years, no one would have dared to dig under these structures, to disturb the place that seemed so solid, so permanent. And now, after all this time, the truth had been uncovered, hidden beneath the ashes. The fire had done more than just destroy. It had revealed the twisted secret buried in the cabin's foundations, a secret that had been waiting to be found for decades. The officers stood silent, their minds racing to process what they had just uncovered. Mark, the man who had once been a hiker but now seemed like something more tragic, was still kneeling beside the charred remnants of his stuffed dog. He was lost in his grief, his mind fractured by the weight of his past and the horror that had finally caught up with him. No more, he whispered again, and then he simply collapsed, overwhelmed by the weight of everything. The fire had taken the cabin, but it had also unearthed a darkness that had been buried for far too long. The truth was now out, and there was no escaping it. The town would never be the same. Calvin was a place so remote, even the locals didn't talk much about it. It was nestled deep in the Alaska mountains, hidden away in the vast emptiness, as though the earth itself had forgotten about it. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps, a whisper of a name that seemed to belong to a world that didn't want to be found. Few had ventured there, and those who did rarely spoke of their experiences. It was a place of silence and forgotten things, tucked away in a land where time seemed to stand still. The fire had brought attention to Calvin, though not in the way anyone had expected. When the fire crew and forest rangers arrived, they found Mark, the man who had been wandering aimlessly for days, barely holding on to reality. Hysterical and trembling, he clutched his dusty old dog toy, the one thing left from a life that seemed like a distant memory. His dog was gone, and with it, any semblance of the man he had once been. Mark's mind had shattered long ago, but it wasn't until that night in the cabin, in the fire and the ashes, that the true weight of his madness became clear. The fire had revealed the horrors beneath the cabin, the buried bones, the twisted secret that had lingered for years. It had been too much for Mark, too much for anyone to bear. The Rangers, now faced with a man who was no longer fully there, did the only thing they could. They brought him to the hospital, still muttering "no more" under his breath, his eyes vacant, lost in a place no one could reach. The staff at the hospital administered the medications he needed, and slowly, over time, he was moved to a nursing home. It was there, in the sterile quiet of the institution, that Mark's existence stretched on, a shadow of what he once was. One evening, as the darkness of night fell and the hum of the lights buzzed overhead, a doctor entered his room. The man was older, professional, and spoke with a calm, practiced voice. "Okay, Mark," the doctor said gently. "That will be all for today. You can rest now." Mark sat on the edge of his bed, his hands curled tightly around the worn fabric of his stuffed dog toy. The world around him was a blur of white walls and sterile air. He didn't know how long he had been here, days, weeks, months, time had no meaning anymore. But he still held on to that toy, the last connection to a life he had lost long ago. As the doctor left, the room fell silent. The lights flickered off, and the darkness wrapped around him. Mark closed his eyes, clutching the toy tighter, as though it could shield him from the pain. He held it to his chest and whispered softly, "There's finally no more knocking noises." "Ha, boy." His voice was thin, quiet, almost imperceptible. He smiled, but it was a smile laced with sorrow, the smile of someone who had long since given up on ever finding peace. He whispered again, his voice shaking, "I'll see you soon, boy. I'll see you soon." And with that, Mark's eyes closed, the weight of his world slipping away into the stillness. His breathing slowed, and the faintest smile lingered on his lips, as if the comfort of his stuffed dog toy was the last thing he truly knew. Mark died that night, alone, with no family to speak of, no home to return to. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was at peace. The knocking had stopped. The darkness was no longer something to fear. He had found his rest.